Okay, hello, and welcome to this mini panel discussion. This is organized jointly by the Institute for Middle East Studies at George Washington University, and together with the Middle East Research and Information Project. This is part of their public outreach partnership. So I'm Adnan Khan, and I'm an independent journalist and based between the Netherlands and Turkey. So I'll be moderating what I'm hoping is going to be an illuminating discussion or a dive into the murky world of the global trade in plastic waste and how it intersects with the refugee labor exploitation in Turkey specifically, but more broadly in the world. So I'm joined in Amsterdam with Jeroen Dagevos. Jeroen is the head of programs at the Plastic Soup Foundation. And he's been a tireless campaigner to end the world's dependence on plastic. Most recently, I believe he's been focusing on advocacy work to shape the developing international frameworks governing the trade in plastic waste. And in Ankara, we're honored to have Dr. Metin Çorabatır. He is a longtime advocate for refugee rights in Turkey and the president of the Research Center for Asylum and Migration. And that's an organization I believe Metin Bey set up himself or helped to set up in 2013 after retiring from the UNHCR. So welcome, hoş geldiniz. Welcome, Jeroen. Hoş geldiniz, Metin Bey. So nice to
Very
have you.
much.
Yeah. So I want to get things rolling. Just to start things off, I'm going to sort of deal with the two issues separately because most people think of them as separate issues. So I want to sort of get a sense of plastic waste trade on the one hand and refugee labor on the other, and then we'll sort of move towards how the two come together and intersect. So Jeroen, let's get started with you. If you could just sort of talk a little bit about the current state of play with plastic waste, the trade globally. How big is it? Who are the main actors, and how has it developed over the years?
Yeah. The thing with plastic is the plastic market is increasing since it's on the market. Plastic production really started in the last century, just after the Second World War, around 1950, and then you see a very steep growth in plastic use for almost everything. I'm almost reaching my 50s now, and if I look back at the pictures in my youth, things are changing. Everything becomes plastic, and you can see it in the production numbers. We're now production about 500 million tons of plastic a year, which is huge. The prediction is we're going to double or even triple if we keep continuing as we do. So the problem is getting bigger every year, and that's also what we're seeing in the waste side of the whole story. Half of the plastic production is produced for single-use appliances, especially packaging, fast-moving consumer goods, fast fashion. Very short lifetimes of using, and it's getting into the waste phase very quickly, and that's what we're seeing. I mean, it's about 900 million kilograms of plastic waste a year, and the big players, the Netherlands, for example, we export 200 million plastic waste a year, and that's also because we import a lot and we export it again. But there's a huge streams of plastic waste are getting out of Europe, and of course things are changing. With new legislation coming up, and adopted legislation, but still it's not a closed system.
Yeah, plastic waste use, like you said, is it's been just sort of gradually growing for a century now. When did it sort of switch over to become a commodity plastic? Because now it's a tradable commodity, right? I mean, how did that happen, and what are the forces behind that?
The funny or strange thing, how to say it. It is a turning point in 2017. Waste was exported to China, and the promise was we send it to China and they deal with it. They will recycle everything, and everything is fine, and no worries anymore. So we kept doing that for decades, and then China closed the door, also because of all the issues and the problems with all the waste. And then, of course, there was the big question: now what? So it had to find a way, and that's what happened. It went to other parts in Southeast Asia. It went to Turkey. It went to Mexico, depending on where you are in the geographical area. and it became more clear. There were now products dumped, along the roads, in the forests, and it was quite easy to recognize it because it's packaging. So you can actually see, Dutch products were found in Indonesia, for example, and then that gave a lot of rumor. The same in Turkey, Dutch products and from other countries as well. In the countrysides, and it became visible. I think that's the big change after 2017 and before 2017. And if you look broader at the whole promise of, we are going to recycle everything. Of course, you can recycle everything. That's not the problem. The only thing is it's expensive, and it's easier and cheaper to do something else than really recycling. And that's what's happening. You can make a lot of money by just saying you're recycling and then getting rid of it. And there's also a lot of criminal activity in this field involved. So
we'll unpack some of those issues as we go on, but let's look at this idea of this sort of the explosion of plastic. I mean, we've also seen in the last decade or more, Metin Bey, an explosion in migration as well. And I'm wondering, it's become this incredibly politically charged issue globally, as well as, of course, in Turkey. Refugee numbers, I believe now at least the registered numbers are over 37 million, according to the UNHCR globally. Could you set the stage for us, Metin Bey, just sort of what's driving the growing numbers of refugees and how have the numbers evolved in Turkey over the years?
Of course, there are several factors, but if you take the international law describing refugees, we can see the regimes of the countries which put undemocratic practices, or civil wars, domestic wars. These are the factors, mainly widespread violence. Nowadays, the most observed reason for forcing people out of their country, but persecution, political persecution, lack of democratic structures are also continuing to be one of the factors. And these are the main factors, but they're joined by other factors like climate change, environmental issues. They also have the other factors, the main factors, the war, the civil war, domestic internal violence, and pressures by the countries, the governments. They combine together, which force the people to leave their countries, their homes, to find safer places.
I mean, there's quite the irony there, isn't there, between this sort of idea of environmental degradation and how it drives migration, and how, wealthy nations are also largely responsible for that environmental degradation, and in fact, responsible for the plastic crisis that we're living through right now as well. But oftentimes it is these littoral countries or these sort of peripheral countries like Turkey, who bear the brunt of that sort of migration, where you have countries like Turkey, Mexico, or where a lot of they're like transit countries where people basically get stuck. So, and Turkey's numbers have gone up quite a bit, and especially since the 2016 migration deal with Europe. Can you just talk a bit about that?
Yeah, Turkey for years since that time became, according to UNHCR, the largest hosting country. In 2011, the things started in Syria, and rapidly the numbers reach unprecedented levels. For the last couple of years, Turkey, according to UNHCR, was hosting the largest population of refugees, basically Syrians, but also from Afghanistan, Iran, and some other, Iraq, and other countries. Lately, some hundreds of thousands of people from Ukraine came. Russians also came, who don't want to be under the military service. So Turkey is, because of the geographical limitation, hosting the country, many refugees. or people from the similar situations.
Mm.
Legislatively, if we look at the legislative environment, it is Turkey has relatively advanced in legislation. In 2014, the parliament passed a law on asylum. However, and Turkey is also the state party to the 1951 Geneva Convention on the Status of Refugees. However, Turkey maintains a geographical limitation. In a positive side, Turkey established by this law a civil institution to deal with the asylum issues. But this institution, when it was just established, faced a huge numbers of people, and they didn't have any experience. And the law legislation is not very friendly for refugees. Geographical limitation means if you are a refugee from a non-European country, you are not allowed to get or enjoy your convention rights, which includes right to work, right to travel, right to a lot of rights written by the convention, in the convention. So Turkish law sees refugees as a temporary phenomena. Of course, internationally, the ideal is to see refugees as a temporary phenomena, but the international law seeks durable solutions for them to find a country to protect them. In Turkey, for non-European refugees, the durable solutions are considered assumed outside of the country, which means either a voluntary repatriation to their country of origin or to be resettled to other countries. So it is not assumed to live permanently in Turkey and find their durable solutions inside Turkey. Yes.
Yeah, and that's I want to jump a little bit here to another question I had for you. This idea of Turkey does not permanently resettle refugees. So I think the 2016 law that was put in place, the regulation on work permits for foreigners was supposed to, and temporary protection was supposed to offer refugees in Turkey, these sort of refugees that were from non-European countries under Turkish law, was supposed to give them the right to work. But these regulations aren't working, and because resettlement is failed under, I mean, the UNHCR is somewhere around 1% of refugees are resettled. I think in Turkey the resettlement rate is at a dismal single digits as well. So you end up with a large number of essentially stateless people that have nothing, that aren't able to work. How has that regulation for work permits failed, and is that creating a sort of a market for raw labor or exploitable labor?
Yes, particularly the law on foreigners and international protection, which I referred as the refugee law, does not recognize the right to work. The 1960 regulation came as a ad hoc result of the situation. Millions of refugees were in Turkey, and there were no other alternatives but work in an industry or agriculture in a way without registration. They didn't have any registration. So the situation is still there. For non-European refugees, the right of work, which includes the people under temporary protection, it is not right. But the one regulation you mentioned gives open a door to get the permission. And there are bureaucratic administrative problems to get a permission. Ministry of Labor is in charge of giving this. And as a person, you cannot apply for permission. You should find the employer, or the employer should find you and justify why, as a foreigner, you should be employed. And then you should get, the employer should get the work permit,
Mhm.
and its duration is until the work contracts.
Okay.
So in practice, about 200,000 people so far at different periods who were able to get the permission, but after the contract, some of them lost their permission, and the great majority of people are working informally,
And we'll
non-formal
get to the
markets.
we'll get to the informal market and how that can be a source of exploitation. But in terms of Yaron, in terms of regulation, it's not just the migration laws in Turkey or the asylum laws in Turkey that are problematic. Obviously, in the waste sector and the waste trade, particularly, there are a lot of problems, regulatory issues as well. Again, there are sort of regulations in the books, right? But it's supposed to be well regulated with the Basel Convention on the control of transboundary movements. It's such a mouthful, this thing. The transboundary movements of hazardous waste and their disposal. That was plastic waste was brought into that in 2019. Then the European Union, of course, has the waste shipment regulation. The US has its own regulations. So there are these the regulatory frameworks, but they don't seem to be working. European waste is still ending up in Turkey and Indonesia and Vietnam. We see American waste in other places. Why are the regulations failing? What's going on? What's the problem here?
Yeah, in the end, still, it's all about the money. I mean, it's expensive to recycle your waste. That's how it is. And of course, it's possible to recycle it. But if you look in Europe, if you look in the Netherlands, big recyclers are actually going bankrupt. They're in big trouble because they cannot get rid of their recycled material, and they're in financial trouble. So it really pays off to export your waste and get rid of it. And then the argument there's not enough recycle capacity in Europe to recycle our waste, so we need to export it. I mean that's really shameful, I think. There's also not enough capacity somewhere else, so we just export it and good luck with it. It's your problem. That's really not the way of dealing with it and taking your own responsibility. But that is the reality. I mean, just look at the numbers, and we're exporting more, and it's increasing. This month was 10% more than last year, so we're still increasing in exports, and we know it's not dealt with in a proper way. Of course, there's the regulation, and then even the legal pathway. It's already allowed to OECD countries. So Turkey is a nice loophole to say, hey, everything is going there, and they're going to recycle it. On paper, it looks good. And of course, there's also the illegal pathway that's very clearly happening as well. I mean, the inspection, the control, enforcement, it's not enough. It's a paper reality that just to check on paper, and it's not waste. It's a material for recycling, so everything is okay, and just export it. And it's about the port of Rotterdam. I mean, around, it's a huge port with huge amounts of exports, and it's just about 600 containers that are inspected, and then they actually do see stuff that's not okay. So they have no more capacity to do it, the inspection, and that's the real issue. It pays off to do it.
And
And
we're
to give
talking
you an
about.
example,
Sorry, please
it's
go
a
ahead.
lot of money. If you have 100 containers illegal export, that will give you 2 million. I mean, that's attractive, and that's happening. So
Yeah, the numbers are shocking. I mean, we're talking about over 1 million containers a year, and only 600 of them being checked, or somewhere in that range. So here we have this. I just want to bring these two things together now. We have, in Turkey, this issue with asylum seekers, and Turkey having one of the biggest populations of asylum seekers and refugees in the world. Regulatory difficulties trying to find work in work permits, and so being forced into the informal economy, and you have this sort of industry of plastic recycling, which is unregulated in Turkey, where massive amounts of foreign trash is showing up there, often through the black market. And now we have this incredible sort of collision between the two, and tragedies that I've written about, and that are evolving out of this. So, Metin Bey, well, let's go back to if you could, Metin Bey, just talk a little bit about Turkey's economy is heavily dependent on cheap labor. I mean, it's not just plastic recycling; it's also the textile industry where refugees are exploited. How, are laws in place to prevent this? Why is the economy so dependent on cheap labor like this? And what can be done to sort of protect vulnerable populations like refugees?
Especially nowadays, it is a matter of discussion. Some people discuss the contribution of cheap labor of asylum seekers and refugees to Turkish economy. Some things they are a burden to Turkish economy. Definitely, they are contributing to Turkish economy. And there is no other way in many cases to work in a formal way. So informality makes cheap labor. It is not only for refugees, for Turkish citizens also. Even before this mass influx happened from Syria, Turkish labor costs were relatively cheaper because of the value of Turkish lira, and I'm not an economist, but for many other reasons, and also among Turkish people who are a large numbers of them also in informal market, but still there were regulations, controls, inspections before the Syrians entered into this market. Now, with huge numbers, they contribute to the economy, of course. Unfortunately, we don't have any work, scientific work, systematic work to identify what would be the contribution of this Syrian and other refugee labor force to Turkish economy. Actually, a high-level senior official from UNHCR Turkey, very recently I discussed, she was dreaming to make a scientific research to find more systematic data. But at the moment, there is no data. So those for pro-refugee workforce or entire refugee groups, it is only a matter of speculation. But a good observation, if it takes the numbers of refugees in the Turkish industry or agricultural work, of course, definitely they contribute to the Turkish economy overall, and their being a cheap labor, of course, is an advantage for Turkish economy. To give an example, for example, if as a Turkish citizen you are paid for daily salary of 100 Turkish lira, as a refugee, you can do the same job with 20 lira. So there's a big gap, and the number of refugees working in the Turkish industry or economy is increasing. Definitely, logically, you conclude that yes, they are the ones who keep Turkish economy working.
So that's I mean, it's an interesting point you make about the advantage that the Turkish economy has by using refugee labor. Obviously, this is, the advantage is based on the nature of the industry, and I think Yaron, maybe you can speak to that a little bit, because a lot of this plastic that's ending up in Turkey it's only profitable if you do violate, for instance, environmental laws and also labor laws, right? So how is this plastic, we're talking about very cheap plastic that's ending up in Turkey. I mean, can you talk a little bit about the nature of the recycling industry and how it contributes to, is plastic recyclable or is this problematic?
Yeah, yeah. Well, everything is recyclable, so also plastic. But it's all depending on how much money do you want to spend to actually do recycle it. And I think that's the problem. Also, if you have very cheap labor and yeah, also the human rights of the people involved are, yeah, you don't really need to deal with it. Yeah, then you can make money out of it. You can just burn plastic on low temperatures. Yeah, a lot of smoke, a lot of chemicals will get free. That's super unhealthy. If you start shredding plastic, there's a lot of plastic dust that will get into your lungs, that will get into your system. That's very unhealthy. So yeah, that's very cheap, but at the same time, yeah, it's also a big health risk. And it's becoming more and more clear that plastic really has a health impact. For the chemicals involved in plastic, that was clear already for years, although it's still becoming more and more visible. A new study calculated only in the US from plastic packaging and 250 billion a year of health issue related things. But also now with new research that actually micro and especially nanoplastic is entering, yeah, through your lungs, but also it's in your blood. It's reaching your organs. It has also effects in your body. That's also becoming more and more clear, and especially in recycling business, and especially under poor conditions. That's a huge risk for your health. I have no doubt about that. I visited some recycle sites in the past, and that was under pretty good conditions, but still I was worried about all the dust that was around there, and really happy I could leave that space. If you're living there, yeah, on a daily basis, that's really unhealthy, I think.
Metin Bey, do you think that this reliance on sort of cheap industries that require cheap labor, is that a way for Turkey to continue, or I mean, is there a relationship between that reliance on industries with cheap labor and the refugee issue, because the two seem to be interconnected? And in what ways do you think they are interconnected?
Well, I think it was it developed spontaneously, and there are several aspects of it. For example, if we look at the big industry, big business, huge companies, they are refraining to employ refugees. The refugees are working just for their as a to continue their life, to bring home a bread. They go to small and medium-sized industries. These are the main economic structures that they find jobs. And in this area, medium and small-sized industry, there is less regulation. When we ask the big business, first, they should like to have a continuation of the labor. They invest, they train them, and they want feedback for long years. The refugee status is not there, and many refugees are in temporary status. So there are reasons for big industry to employ refugees, whether informally or formally. But one of the pillars of Turkish economy is small and medium-sized industry. They can find directly jobs daily based, or some of them are now become more skillful people and become higher in the hierarchy of the industry, small industry centers. So there are different elements. What we don't have, first, doesn't have a systematic data. Plus, of course, there is an awareness on use of plastics. There have been campaigns and regulations. Markets, you have to pay now some penny to buy a plastic bag. But I'm not sure if we have big recycling regulations. And as Harp and Groves. I'm sorry for pronouncing your name, but you said it is very expensive business for recycling. So I don't think that any big plastic recycling structure in Turkey exists.
Yeah.
So yeah, that is, I'm going back to your question. Definitely ad hoc refugees, we are talking about more than 3 million people, many of them young people, they need to work and of course contribute the economy. But it is difficult to say whether economy completely rely on this or how long would that continue. This week, Ankara Governorate organized a meeting with NGOs, and there he mentioned that the work permit issue we would probably be transferred from the Minister of Labor to the, in case of refugees, to the Migration Management Presidency to accelerate the things. So we don't know what would happen.
Yeah, so there is some movement happening there, and that's interesting because, and as sort of to close things out, I did want to talk about solutions and what we can do, because what we really seem to have here, it's the refugee population in the world continues to grow as again because of war and climate change and other sort of contributing factors. At the same time, as Jeroen mentioned, the number, the plastic use is going up and up and continues to sort of skyrocket. And at the same time, I mean, I think a lot of what we're seeing is the international community, particularly wealthy countries, have taken the steps of shutting down borders and turning their borders into what Stefan Mau at Humboldt University in Berlin, he calls sorting machines. So it's basically trying to sort out the skilled migrants, whether that's through the immigration system, and now even increasingly in the asylum and resettlement system, they are starting to pick and choose the skilled refugees as well, which leaves a huge sort of population of unskilled labor available for exploitation in industries like recycling and other sort of labor intensive industries. So I'm wondering, given this really sort of distressing situation we're coming in, Jeroen, what do you think the responsibilities are of sort of wealthy nations like the Netherlands, like the US, other European nations to deal with this issue?
Yeah, well, I think we should deal with our own waste. I mean, that's pretty clear. And it's also in consumption. We consume way too much and we produce way too much waste. I think that's the first big step, to take. And we should deal with our own waste, create our own recycling, but also have a good look. How much are we actually using and can we do it in a different way? And I'm optimistic it's happening. I see things changing. New economic models are being developed. New materials are available. I mean, we have to scale it up for packaging, for textile, etc. It's possible, and we can make that decision. And in the beginning, it may cost us a little bit more money, but that's the way to do it. And in that way, I'm also optimistic, especially about Europe. We have the opportunity to do it, and we need to do it, because if we don't, we will lose the whole market. So yeah, again, it's all about money. So use it in the right direction and involve the right players to invest in the proper way, also because of economic benefits. So
Yeah, and Turkey, I mean, Metin Bey, it's economic benefits as well. I mean, a few of the speaking of the economy, and a few of the refugees that I interviewed, or many of them that I interviewed in Istanbul and in Turkey, working in these recycling factories, they almost to a person they said, listen, they don't want to lose their jobs. As bad as things are, as bad as the working conditions are, there's nothing else to do. And if they lose their jobs, they could very well have to return to their home countries where they might be persecuted. So if the industry is properly regulated in Turkey, then these jobs will disappear. So what would then be what's the responsibility for in Turkey to sort of make sure that that these refugees aren't being just completely now put out onto the streets and even in more precarious situations?
Turkey is not the only country hosting large numbers of refugees. Many developing countries or less developing countries, unfortunately, assumes the big burden of global refugee movements. Industrial world's proportions are much less. On the other hand, these countries hosting large numbers of refugees, having a burden of these population movements, also doesn't have enough regulations. As I said, Turkey is a state party to 51 Convention, but excludes 99% of refugees because of their being or coming from non-European countries out of the status. So yes, Turkey use or Turkish economy effortlessly use cheap labor force labor of the refugees. But I assume, and this assumption is based on historical development of asylum law and practice. If Turkey lifts the geographical limitation, make work as a right for refugees, it would not be, it would be benefit of refugees not to fear to lose their jobs or to get less salaries, but the market would be much better regulated, and then the Turkish economy would benefit from that. It's a labor force. Turkey is a middle-level developed countries. So many Turks do not like to work in some industries, for example. Also, for example, hundreds of thousands of refugees are able to attend the universities. There's an argument by anti-refugee groups saying that Europe in 1960s, 2060s, 2015s took the cream of prima of the refugee population. All educated, high educated Syrians were moved to Germany or other countries, and those unskilled people were left in Turkey, became a burden. It is not true. If you look at the experience of refugees and refugees, with all difficulties who are able to graduate from universities, they couldn't find jobs because and formal jobs, and an engineer could work as a waiter or any other unrelated sector. So not only Turkey and many other countries, hosting countries, also either not state part of the 51 Convention or although parts of the convention, part of the convention do not apply it. So I think the role of the Western countries, wealthy countries, US, Canada, and European countries, should push or encourage these hosting countries first to make better regulations, to sign and implement the international law accordingly. So this should be the only exit strategy. This cheap labor cannot be sustainable. So regular markets giving the opportunities of refugees to have the right to access to social security, to see their futures. In these countries hosting large numbers, less developed countries, just create to somehow their own problems. And this problem costs a lot to the refugee life.
It sounds to me like it's the basic solution. Give refugees the status they deserve, the right to work, and they will be productive parts of society and contribute to their host societies. So I think that's amazing. Thank you so much. I think we can end the discussion there. Thank you for everything. It's been a very interesting discussion, a little bit heavy, I guess, on the soul. It's a very difficult topic, but I appreciate all of the insights you've given. And thank you to IMIS and to Marip for providing this space for this. Thank you, guys.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. All right. Bye.